Welcome, everyone. That was our official theme song, Ariel Pink, Everyone's Wrong. Um, Quite fitting for the Worldview Study course. So welcome. Welcome to Stoa, the first session of Worldview Studies. So good to have all of you here. And I can see there's a bunch of first timers, which is awesome. So if you just arrived, check in the chat where you're calling in from, and if you've been to the Stoa before, and maybe throw in one word to describe why you're here. Why are you, did you feel called to sign up to Worldview Studies? Um, so we're gonna get started, and I'm gonna tag in this our presenter today, but I'm gonna do a brief presentation, some housekeeping, and some context setting, so everyone can see this. So Worldview Studies. Mm. So this is a 4-week inverse course with a presentation and a collective inquiry each session, 2 hours in total. And then what's an inverse course? There's a presentation I sent on the email thread. But in traditional education pedagogy, there's a presentation. Some really smart person, Galaxy Brain, teaches things and puts it in people's heads. Um, but we're gonna like flip that a little bit, right? There's gonna be a collective inquiry where the collective wisdom of this group right here is going to sense into this new skill, this world viewing that we're going to be talking about in this course. And then you all are going to teach me and you're going to teach yourselves. So think of the presentations more so as a prompt for the collective inquiry portion. And we're going to challenge everyone here to write an essay a week. It doesn't have to be amazing. It could be just like, have it rough and ready to go, post publicly or send privately. Or if that's too much of an ask, at least have one essay for the duration of this experience, something related to worldview studies, or a topic that came up in the reading, the syllabus, or the presentations. And then bonus week. So there's 4 official weeks. We have 4 speakers, and there's going to be flash presentations on the 5th session, and it's going to be from you. So whoever submits an essay, we're going to select you, and then you're going to have like a 5-10 minute presentation at the last session. We did this the last time. We did this inverse course experience, and it was quite fun. So I think you're going to enjoy that. And then the recordings right after this are going to be sent privately to the cohort, and then eventually it'll be released at the Stoa YouTube channel. And so since we have some first timers here, what is the Stoa? So the Stoa was uh, started in 2020 during the pandemic. Basically happened on Zoom. We're having like 40 sessions a week. It was to kind of like sense make all the craziness that was happening, the meta crisis had a philosophical essence. Um, and now it's kind of turning into a school or an inverse school. That's what I feel like it's heading. But something different, something a little edgy. And it was one of the original dark forests. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this concept. It was from Yancey Strickler. These are non-indexable places on the web where people cohere, like they hide away from the surface web, and they talk about what matters most. And Sean Monahan from 8 Ball, he was a previous presenter at a different course. He just posted this, the dead internet theory versus the dark forest theory, which I quite like, where the dead internet theory was a conspiracy theory that there's no humans online, it was actual bots. But people are saying that no, like people like Sam Altman is like the dead internet theory is probably coming true because you can't tell who's human, who's AI anymore. And so these dark forest spaces where we can actually be human and communicate with one another are going to be quite important. Um, and yeah, shouts out to Meta Label who helped promote this, and this is where it got posted. And Yancey Strickler was the one that coined the dark forest concept, and at least the internet version of it. And he founded Meta Label. And Meta Label is really cool because it allows you to split revenue with the collaborators, the presenters here today. So big thank you for everyone who contributed because the money that we received are going to be split amongst the presenters, and we have excellent uh, presenters in this course. We've got Rina, Gary, Simon, and myself, um, and they all have really good up and coming Substacks. And today we got Rina. And Rina is an internet culture researcher and writer. She writes at Incognita. It's one of my favorite Substacks, so I highly recommend checking it out. And she's got this, like, what is this? The 500-year vibe shift. Oh, I can't wait. I can't wait. So, how today's going to work? Rena's going to present for 30 to 40 minutes, and then we're going to have a Q&A. So if you have questions anytime, put it in the chat. I'll call and you can unmute yourself, ask it to Rina. And then we're going to take a brief break. Rina might have to slip out because she's traveling. And then we're going to do the collective inquiry portion, and I'll explain how that works. That's going to be not recorded. So I'll explain how that works when we get there. Uh, that being said, Rina, welcome to the Stoa. I'm going to take you in.
Great. Thanks, Peter, for having me. Thanks to the Stoa. Thanks for all of you for joining me today from all over the world. It's so cool to see all these places that you're from and just super exciting. I am calling in today from a ranch in West Texas, usually based in LA, but I'm on the move these couple of days. So let me just share my screen and we can get into it. All right, can you guys all see this? Okay, wonderful. So,
Did you want to make it the full screen? Because we do see the browser, if that's
um, I'm going to keep it like this because I have my presenter notes up and I don't know how to have those up at the same time
cool.
as doing the full screen. So, apologies for that. But um, So this is something that I call the 500-year vibe shift. It is a presentation that compiles a bunch of different ideas that I've actually been thinking about for a few months, but I haven't really formalized and synthesized yet. So this is the first time I'm actually sharing these ideas with people. So excited to hear your thoughts afterwards. The presentation in general will be about the theory of paradigm shifts. So how things change in the world, the last time things changed in a major way, and where we might be in that cycle today. Um, So, if you're not familiar with my work already, I am a culture researcher and writer. I write at Incognita, as Peter mentioned. It's a Substack that you can check out at the link on the screen. I write mostly about the internet, and all the weird things that happen on the internet, whether that's emerging cultural trends or digital posting behaviors, niche online subcultures, as well as from a more abstract lens, I also write about power and spirituality. Um, so in the late 1800s, New York City was facing a very big problem. And this was 7 million pounds of cumulative manure per day from the city's 200,000 horses. Now, as the city's population had grown over the past few decades, so did the city's horse population. So now it was getting to the point where there was manure all on the streets, on the sidewalks. It was smelling terrible. The city's infrastructure was just not equipped to deal with this level of manure. And people were understandably freaking out about this. People were projecting, since the population would keep increasing, so would the horse population, and living in New York City it might just be untenable in the next few decades. So people were trying to rack their brains, think of a solution, how to solve this horse manure problem. And one thing that they did not think about was the car, which completely rendered irrelevant all of the horse problems they were having. So if we look at this image from 1900, we'll see one car in a sea of horse-drawn carriages. And then just over a decade later, we see one horse-drawn carriage in a sea full of cars. So this happens a lot in history. Something unexpected takes the place of something that people take for granted, and it reshapes the world around it. So the car obviously changed a lot of things. It expanded the possibilities of travel. People could go across the country at increasingly high speeds. It led to the development of the interstate highway system. It led to the explosion of the fossil fuel industry. And as it solved those old problems, it created new ones, like contributing to climate change. Um, so while the car changed the material structure of the world, when we talk about consciousness and the way we perceive the world on a fundamental level, it only really changed consciousness a little, in that it didn't really fundamentally alter what counts as true or what counts as valuable in our society or what it means to be a human. So I like to split up the world into layers. For simplicity's sake, just I cut the world into different ways depending on what I want to analyze. So these are a few layers of the world, going from most shallow surface level at the top to most fundamental at the bottom. Um, so order, that's how the world is arranged, both physically and conceptually. The kind of physical infrastructure of the world, as well as what kind of institutions are viewed as legitimate and govern the way the world operates. Now, this layer of order all arises from this more deeper level of meaning. So why does this all matter? What's the story or the worldview of why we're doing what we do? How do we make sense of the world? These stories that we tell ourselves. And those stories are crafted and very intertwined with our values, what we care about, what we perceive as important, what kinds of things we privilege over other things. But these values can only arise if we have a common understanding of truth. So it's kind of like the bare minimum that you need in a society. Otherwise, communication becomes impossible. And that's what kinds of things exist and how do we know that they exist? So unless you agree on that, none of the rest can blossom out of that. So while the car changed this top order level pretty significantly, some technological changes cut down all the way to truth. And that only really happens every once in a while. Um, so when we talk about something cutting all the way down to the level of truth and fundamentally reordering the way we see the world, we are also talking about a paradigm shift. So what is a paradigm? Thomas Kuhn, writing in The Structure of Scientific Revolutions about scientific paradigms mostly, but this could also be extended to paradigms in other realms, he writes, the paradigm is the entire constellation of beliefs, values, techniques, and so on, shared by the members of a given community. Um, and the philosopher Michel Foucault also comes to a similar term, which he calls the episteme, which he says are the a priori assumptions that define the conditions of possibility for all knowledge. So importantly, it's not just the body of knowledge that arises in a society during a given time, but it is the fundamental assumptions that govern what questions are being asked, the container that that knowledge creation happens in the first place. So both of these definitions kind of gesture at the same thing, that the paradigm, also called the worldview, is a set of often internalized subconscious assumptions that we make about the nature of the world during any given time period and in any given society. So when I say paradigm through the course of this presentation, this is basically what I mean, the assumptions that we have through which we make sense of the world. Um, so we talked about the car, but now let's talk about an invention that changed a paradigm in a major way, and that is the printing press. Um, so when the printing press was invented in the mid 1400s, it unleashed a wave of information, and with it, it also unleashed a century and a half of social, political, epistemic instability where people were questioning the nature of truth itself. So prior to this point, um, under the medieval system, truth was considered revealed by God, heavily gatekept by the church. So it wasn't something that individual people had access to. It was something that was created by God and then passed down. So to question the church's authority was to question truth itself. But now suddenly more people had access to information than ever before, and this undermined the church's monopoly on information. So this enabled the rapid circulation of new ideas, dissenting ideas, um, and it fundamentally reshaped human consciousness because it expanded the field of ideas that could be accessed to human thought, could be accessed by human thought. Um, so, from this expanded field, everyone was kind of coming up with their own interpretations of scripture. Christianity fragmented, it culminated in the Protestant Reformation. It also led to waves of propaganda, psyops, fake news, all words that sound very familiar today. And this happened as authorities tried to kind of regain control over the situation. This also led into physical battles and physical instability, culminating in the Hundred Years' War in this battle to regain dominance. So when the dust settled, it led to the period that we now know as the Enlightenment, where the world realigned around a new sense-making system. And there were a couple other destabilizing factors that led to this major realignment that were happening at the same time. So we talked about the printing press, but there was also some scientific discovery happening that contributed to this destabilization. And there was also increasing economic material complexity. So what happened was we went from a feudal and medieval way of understanding the world into a completely new way of understanding the world with new ideas, new values, new sources of meaning. And many of those ideas are still around today. And we will get into the implications of that a little bit later on. So scientific discovery, this was another thing that was being heavily destabilized at the time. So, as Thomas Kuhn writes, also in The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, which is a book that I highly recommend for more on this topic, um, he describes the way paradigms shift in science is because anomalous observations accumulate beyond what old theories are able to explain. Most notably, this happened in the famous example of the Copernican revolution, where the understanding of the universe went from being geocentric, with man as central to God's plan, and therefore the Earth must be central to the universe. However, that system was kind of not able to account for various anomalous observations that kept stacking up. So then we shifted into the system we have today with the Earth and the planets revolving around the sun. So this combined with Newtonian physics also decentered humanity and displaced this divine purpose and engendered a new understanding of the world as one that could be mathematically modeled. So this teleological divine system rooted in the Christian faith was replaced with a mechanistic worldview. And it also importantly made truth accessible through reason and observation, and it established the individual as someone who is able to access truth directly. Which was a radical idea for the time. It was incredibly liberating to the individual. So once the cosmos could be explained without God, institutions could also be governed without God. And the third thing that was happening at the time was increasing urbanization, trade, population growth, colonial extraction, made centralized hierarchical feudal systems that previously worked in local areas untenable. And these feudal systems were rooted in the worldview that the world is perfectly created according to God's plan, and everyone has this role in this divine hierarchy. So the kings are kings, the nobles are nobles, the peasants are peasants, and that is what it is. And social mobility was not only rare, but also looked on with suspicion. Um, but this increasing material complexity demanded new forms of coordination, and so the market emerged. And this was a way more efficient way to generate order from all these disparate nodes without the need for a centralized control or centralized hierarchy. Um, and also, it was a great way to align incentives, not in the language of fear of hell or promise of heaven, especially if the people you're trading with might not necessarily ascribe to that worldview, but it aligned incentives according to financial value. So value was recoded in the language of economics rather than ethics. This combined with Protestantism, which reformed work as a sign of moral superiority, shifted the perception of value during the time from spiritual obedience, humility, alignment with God's will into a worldly demonstration of productivity and progress. So these destabilizing forces that happened during that time led to a complete phase shift from an old world into a new one. Um, so from truth all the way to order, everything kind of got reimagined. Um, Truth went from being received by God and gatekept by the church to something that could be directly accessed through logic and observation. Value went from obedience, humility, faith to productivity, agency, and reason. Meaning went from performing these divinely assigned roles with the hope of salvation in the afterlife to this narrative of progress. And self-improvement of the human. And then order went from this hierarchy with this divine chain of being from gods to the angels to the kings to the nobles to the peasants to the animals to the inanimate matter, and legitimacy through divine right, to rule of law, bureaucracy, and then legitimacy through social contract, where people agreed to be governed. Um, so, what do all of these changes during the Enlightenment point to in a more general sense about the nature of paradigm change? According to both Kuhn and Foucault and other philosophers that speak about this subject, paradigms change where there is a rupture. Old explanations and systems cease to describe and understand the world. And that's why things often feel like they stop making sense in the period leading up to one of these paradigm shifts. So, oh yeah. Okay, so think of it like yogurt. The only notes I wrote for this is yogurt, by the way. So you have a yogurt cup, right? And it's messy, and there's like stuff coming out of it, and there's lots of pieces. But you can kind of get a general sense of like the size and shape if you draw a little box around it. Um, so this is like the world. As the world gets more complex, as it grows in scale, as there's more people, more stuff in it, it starts to outgrow the categories that we impose on it to make sense of it. And that's where we get this feeling of friction. That's where we get this sense of things stop making sense or things start falling apart. So eventually, you just need a bigger box. So you got to get rid of the old box and reinscribe a new box around it in a way that helps you to make sense of it again. So, what this points to is really a relationship between the world and our perception of it. And change is driven by this ongoing dialogue. So, as the world changes, it causes us to change our perception, and our perception, then, the new ways we have of understanding things, influence the way we order the world around us. And that in turn leads to more novelty, more creation, and ends up changing the world, which then changes our perception again, and so on in this kind of endless spiral. Um, what I'm really saying is that the story of history is one of a constant negotiation between order and chaos. And these are very fundamental forces that drive not just human history, but operate on a universal scale. So we can think about biology, the evolution of life forms in these bodies as a way of coping with a chaotic environment. Or we can think of the early universe and clouds of hot matter that condense into stars and then explode again as supernovas. It's just another dance between chaos and order. So history is just one manifestation of this, and this polarity is what drives change in any domain. Um, and then the other thing I want to say about this slide is that when these forces are described in spiritual systems, it's not a metaphor, it's an abstraction. So spirituality is a way of describing literally what's happening, but in very abstract terms, the patterns that govern our reality, whether they are manifested in biological evolution or the rise and fall of civilizations. So, another way to look at this constant cycle of change is to look at civilization as a way to both generate and cope with complexity. Um, and this kind of takes shape along three driving axes. So one is energy, or which is everything that powers the material realm. The second is information, and the third is meaning or human consciousness. How it then compiles in a way that makes sense to us. Um, so any civilization that is existing beyond subsistence level is capturing surplus energy. And this is what leads to experimentation, new inventions, new discoveries, because if you think about it, it's energetically costly to experiment and be creative. If you're just trying to get by, you're going to be only redirecting energy towards the processes that help you survive. But if you have a little bit of extra energy to expend, that's really where novelty, new creation happens. You also need more and more energy to power more physical human bodies and create more physical stuff in the world around you. Um, so as societies capture more energy, they also tend to get more complex just because there is a because of the sheer number of people and buildings and institutions and things around them. Um, so this energetic realm kind of governs everything that's in the material. But as this material complexity increases, so does the information that comes along with it. So if you think about just a society that's increasing in population, there are more interactions between people, there's more communication between people, and therefore information also goes up. Um, so the world is, and then not to mention new information technologies that lead to a phase shift in the amount of information in a system. So as energy goes up and information goes up, we sense that things kind of become more complex. Things start to feel chaotic. The world kind of stops making sense because these two external domains have kind of surpassed our meaning infrastructure and the ways that we use to make sense of the world. So the world is also being filtered and perceived through human consciousness. So we, in order to understand it, we need to compress all of that increasing complexity into something that is useful for us. Um, so in my formulation on paradigms, and just to get a little bit more specific about it, the way I would put it is a paradigm shifts when material and informatic conditions trigger a major shift in consciousness. And then that leads to a subsequent civilizational realignment. So that being said, where are we today? Um, so I would argue that we've gone through another major informatic shift on the scale of the printing press, and that is the internet. Um, our relationship with information has been completely changed. If we look at this chart of the books that were printed in Europe in the centuries after the printing press and compare that to the global data generated annually in just the past few years, we start to see a similar pattern. So this phase shift in our relationship to information means there is probably a massive transformation ahead. And with all this information kind of floating around, things kind of feel like they've stopped making sense. It's something that you often hear about the internet. So, like the period after the printing press, my hypothesis is we're in a period where, when we think about order and chaos, chaos is going to start to become more dominant. And we already kind of see this already. There is a fragmentation of worldviews, which is in part what this course is about. Everyone is offering their own claim to truth because everyone has access to more information than ever before. And like the period after the printing press, we also get propaganda and psyops, this time algorithmic and highly targeted. And we also feel like our old systems are breaking down. And this is expected because, again, the complexity of our world is exceeding our frameworks to structure it. Um, so a lot of these worldviews, a lot of these claims on truth are often reactionary, a call to traditional family values, for instance, or even you hear a call for a return to Enlightenment values. Um, To me, I see these as the system naturally trying to revert to a more stable state, reverting to something that has worked in the past, but without having a clear idea of the future. And while Enlightenment values may have worked great for that time that was dominated by medieval hierarchy, we are living in a very, very different world in which those ideas may no longer be so competitive. Um, because, like the printing press, the internet has already changed our consciousness. Um, and it's done so in a number of different ways, but I will just list out a few of the main ones that come to mind for me. The first is that we see the world as interconnected. It feels like rather than a static object, it feels like a networked process that is in constant flux. So the internet collapses this distance between people, so that everything feels present at once, constantly updating. There seems to be no sense of a fixed truth. And in this information rich landscape, skepticism and discernment become more prevalent and more valuable rather than seeking out information or information recall in prior information scarce conditions. The second is that um, the hierarchy of knowledge and power has gone from this, or is kind of beginning to transition from this like hierarchical, institutionally mediated structure to a more kind of vertical, or sorry, a more horizontal distributed network-like structure. So there's no kind of privileged source of authority when it comes to information. It becomes context dependent and emergent. One person might be an expert in one thing, one person might be an expert in another. And in addition to this flattening, that comes with the erosion of institutions, you also get simultaneous exposure to an infinite number of viewpoints. So you get this exposure to multiple perspectives, and it erodes the sense that there is even a single correct perspective. Instead, it generates this level of meta perspectival awareness, which is the perspective that the world is composed of infinite perspectives. Um, so it's a perspective of perspectives, if you will. Um, and the third thing is systemic awareness, which is just to say that as agency and intelligence are distributed across these networks and machines, the human subject is just resituated as one node in these larger architectures. So whether that's like algorithmic, or whether that's the larger infrastructure of like the planet that comes into view as we get more planetary data, um, we become kind of just one node in these larger systems. So the world is seen as a more complex cybernetic ecosystem rather than a stage for human action. Um, so as we're reeling with the effects of this changing informatic regime, ushered in by the internet, um, we also get AI. And obviously, it's impossible to say what the repercussions of AI will be, since we're just in such early phases of it. But from what I'm already seeing, it feels like AI will be another Copernican revolution in the sense that it will dethrone the human from the center of reason in the same way that the Copernican revolution dethroned the Earth from the center of the universe. And what I mean by this is that AI challenges humanity's monopoly on reason and on creativity. Um, so we're no longer special privileged beings. And a lot of the ways that we've derived our value as humans is now being challenged, especially in the realm of economic productivity. And I'm not saying that this is 100% going to be the case, but it is a possibility that AI can start to do a lot of our work for us. And what do we do when we're running an Enlightenment era value system that ties our value to economic production in a world where that's no longer tenable for us humans? So that portends a deep realignment that goes deep into our fundamental values. Um, so taking the AI and taking the internet, my hypothesis is that we are on the cusp of a major paradigm shift, similar to what happened in the period leading up to the Enlightenment. Um, so, obviously, predicting a new paradigm from within an old one is challenging. It's like predicting the car in the age of the horse. Um, but we can start to see, I think, some potential leading indicators of um, how the world might shift. And we can find those in the areas where the most fundamental assumptions of our reality are being questioned. So, just to list a few for you here. Um, Value. Um, so our current economic systems don't capture all kinds of value. And the mechanism of price, for example, is an amazing technology to abstract value, to transfer it, to communicate value, but it it only really optimizes for one type of value, and it reduces um, all these nuances of value into kind of one index. Um, And then our current economic system also doesn't account for negative externalities. So in the models we use today, any impact that our economic activity has on the environment around us is not accounted for. And obviously, we know that that's not the way the world works, because our economic activity has impact on the environment, for instance, or on our social fabric. Which one are valuable in themselves, but two also then come around. If you damage those, that also damages economic productivity in the long run. Um, so we have new models that question this. For example, in the field of like regenerative economics, there's something called donut economics, which is a model proposed by economist Kate Rayworth. It's a framework for rethinking economic systems beyond this obsession with growth, and it replaces the goal of GDP expansion with the goal of meeting human needs within planetary boundaries. So it works kind of on two rings. The inner ring represents the minimum standards of living required for human well-being. We want to stay above that. And then the outer ring is the ecological ceiling, which represents the planetary boundaries that we must stay in to not cause damage to the greater system. So it's the practice basically of staying in between these two rings, um, rather than optimizing for endless growth. Second thing that is being called into question is the individual as a bounded autonomous agent. Um, so I mentioned this a little bit with the internet and how it's changing our perspective of the individual as interconnected. So we're not separate from everyone else. Um, and the individual and the personality and the self, as shown in psychology and neuroscience, we know that it's shaped by our environment, our social inputs, our unconscious processes, our past experiences. um, and all of these things contribute to who we consider ourselves to be. Um, and also, we become aware, with this greater awareness of interconnectedness, that the actions that we take have effects that ripple through to other people. So we begin to see the self not as an individual bounded agent, but as a single node within this interconnected network. And if you make one small change here, the impacts also ripple through to the broader system. Um, so even future-looking worldviews don't question the primacy of the individual. Something like transhumanism imagines these superhumans with these technologically enhanced capabilities, um, but it's just the same printing press era myth of individual progress repackaged through a technological lens. And the third thing I'll mention is science, which refuses to recognize persistent evidence of anomalous phenomena. So these are theories into the nature of consciousness, psi phenomena like ESP or precognition, like in the telepathy tapes or UAPs, which have been recently coming into public consciousness. So taken on their own, any one of these incidents could be considered crazy or unexplainable. But with thousands of persistent reports across decades, um, it appears to me intellectually dishonest to write these off as impossible because they just don't fit into our current understanding of science, without any further investigation. So science has become dogmatic. Um, it starts to play the same role that the church did prior to the Enlightenment. Its rationale is that this can't possibly exist because it's outside the realm of science, which implies that science provides the answers to all of reality, just as the church claimed 500 years ago. Um, and then finally, to end off with a couple maybe predictions for what might be competitive ideas in this new landscape and this new reality. Um, we know that consciousness has already changed with the advent of the internet. We have become more interconnected than ever. We have become more systems aware. I think this perspective will likely persist, viewing ourselves as a node in a larger system, seeing ourselves in relation to others, and then seeing humanity in relation to the larger planet. And then finally, it's possible that the next paradigm will be a meta paradigm. So as I mentioned before, the exposure to all these simultaneous worldviews through the internet has introduced this layer of meta perspective in people. Which is seeing the world as composed of infinite different perspectives rather than fully identifying with just one. Um, so for someone with this awareness, committing wholeheartedly to just one worldview on offer out of a sea of many of them doesn't really seem to make any sense. It seems like it's too artificially narrowing compared to how we see the world actually take shape around us. So it's possible that we might see a world where we apply different worldviews to different situations in order to get different outcomes. And then finally, I want to say that this level of meta awareness actually makes me quite hopeful for the future because we're able to perceive our civilization in a way that we haven't been able to before. And just as an example, this is the first time in history that we've even had the concept of a paradigm or an awareness that we might be living inside of one. So as we become aware of the assumptions that guide our current understanding of reality, we can realize that nothing ever has to be the way that it is, and nothing ever stays the same. Thank you. And if you're interested in reading more of my work, you can check out my stuff here at these links.
That's yes, give a round of applause for Rina. Awesome presentation. Yeah, the perfect presentation to start us off, I think, because this 500-year paradigm vibe shift is well labeled. So I'm gonna stop your screen share. Yeah. So if you have any questions, we have some great questions in the chat already. Pop them in. I'm gonna ask Rina a few questions, and we'll do the Q&A for about 20, 25 minutes, and we'll do a break. Um, so Rina, regarding the 500-year vibe shift, what metaphysics do you see like emerging beyond the materialist metaphysics that have been dominant for the last
Mm.
500 years? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, these types of questions are just so hard to predict because in 100 years we'll be living in a completely different world. Um, Something that I might offer, and something that I've been reading a little bit about lately is, um, yeah, kind of these new ways that science is being challenged and kind of what that means for how we understand the world. So rather than this like mechanistic system that can be experimentally verified through this empirical scientific method, one that works through logic, cause and effect, we start to see some examples of phenomena that start to happen that don't necessarily follow that logic. So it seems that perhaps um, belief itself can influence the nature of the world around us. So there's an experiment that it was done with these psi abilities, and it showed statistically significant results. However, when it was repeated at a larger scale, those results went away. Notably, the belief of the participants in the first case was high, And in the second case, it was almost non-existent. So that may imply that belief in a certain phenomena actually causes it to happen for someone. So when we also see other kinds of discoveries within like quantum physics that sort of gesture to a similar mechanics, things like entanglement, things like maybe like time not being as linear as we perceive it. So again, it's hard to say what the metaphysics will be, because to me those are just like the tip of the iceberg into an entirely new worldview. But I think that that could give some indication. And yeah, basically the concept that reality might be affected and entangled with our own observation of it and our own belief in it.
Mhm. Yeah, it's really cool. Because I've been tracking like the different metaphysics that are seem to be emerging, like idealism, animism, process philosophy, supernaturalism. And if your claim is correct, is that if you really believe in that, and how's the world going to shape, and you're going to co-create it. Um, and my follow-up question is regarding politics and how new political movements adopting these new metaphysics will, interact, rebel, fight against the neoliberal, technocratic power elite who seem to still adopt a materialism and a scientism.
Mm.
And predictive history, he came to the Stoa recently, and he said that was like being parasitized by the power elite as a control mechanism, keep everyone atomized, fragmented. So I'm curious how you think that's going to play out.
Yeah, I've heard that as well. In terms of politics and governance, I think the systems for an alternative governance are being built right now under our noses. I see a lot of that within crypto governance spaces. And there's a lot of experimentation in governance, alternative forms of governance. Most notably, maybe it's still very, very early in the space, but the most notable example is maybe the network state, where people affiliate by community online, then go buy a piece of land, and it's governed by this DAO, essentially decentralized autonomous organization that provides certain services to people according to what they opt into. So it's this kind of decentralized, and you could belong to a variety of different network states or these types of DAOs, each with a different focus. So then you are kind of a citizen of many of these governance organizations that each maybe provide a different service. And importantly, you have the option to opt in or opt out. Something that you can't do in our world today is like select the country that you want to live in. Really, it's very hard, and um, it seems increasingly unfair that just by the accident of your birth, you could have a fair shot at life or not. Um, so to me, the nation state itself is an outdated technology for organizing people and governing people. And I think we'll start to see more decentralized and more I don't want to say egalitarian, but the types of experiments and the type of ethos that is guiding these experiments today is one that's based in more of a kind of like a flat structure. Yeah.
Mhm. All right, so buckle up, everyone. And we're going to go to the Q&A. So I'm just going to allow everyone to unmute themselves, and you might get muted for this temporarily, Rina. So yeah, I'll call on you. Just ask your question, unmute yourself, ask your question to Rina. One follow-up. It's not a monologue, just that we have more kind of a conversational space during the collective inquiry portion. But Simon, and we're not going to go in order either. Simon, you can unmute yourself and ask your question to Rina.
Is that me, or is there another Simon in here?
Uh, if you asked a question about grappling with economic systems and parallel institutions, if that was that you?
It might have been a different Simon. I do have a question. Well, I
Okay,
have a question slash observation, so I'll go. And if there's
sure.
another Simon in here, feel free to go after me. So, firstly, Peter, I regarding network state, and I think the most famous proponent of network state is Balaji Srinivasan. I'm sure many of you have heard of Balaji. I I'm going to try and turn this into a question, but I'm going to start with an observation. My observation about network state is it is a fascinating set of ideas, and I have some very serious concerns about um, utopian projects that make big promises up front, and then you start to look at the sort of the day-to-day activities of the quote unquote proponents of these sort of big utopian projects, and you start to say, well, let's just look at how they're doing. Let's take Bitcoin as an example.
Simon, could you keep this to a question? We can
Yeah,
more
I'm
on
sorry.
the collective inquiry portion.
Yeah, I apologize. Let me reformulate. So I guess, what are the risks and opportunities, Rina, that you see around decentralized currency and network state type ideas? How's that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not super in depth into the theory of that by any means. I will say I don't think Balaji is the right person to do it. I question his moral integrity. I question his project. It seems to be a repackaging of the same hyper optimization progress narrative that we see from all the Silicon Valley bros. And it seems to be a way of like abdicating political responsibility. But it's an experiment. And one experiment opens the door to more experiments. And the fact that that exists in our reality now makes that idea maybe easier to iterate on in the future by people who have a different vision for it. So I guess that's what I'll say about that. The fact that there are experiments happening in this direction, whether or not they're from the right people right now, is still encouraging to me that experimentation will continue to happen in those spaces, and not necessarily from people that just want to take advantage of those.
Thanks, Simon. And Simon will be, he's one of the presenters in week 3. Shingai, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. You had a question on tools.
Yes, you got it correctly. Thank you. Thank you, Rina, for that great talk. So my question is about technology, and I'm wondering, are there any technologies, and I guess, and or theoretical frameworks, but mostly software, that you found to be particularly helpful for cultivating your own systemic awareness and navigating the chaos of our times?
Oh, that's a good question. I would honestly just say the internet. Um, Nothing in particular, but just this experience of being flooded by data on all sides at all times, 24/7. I think it's really shifted my consciousness, and has made me more meta aware, just through sheer exposure of all the people in the world, all the worldviews that are at play, all the different opinions, all the different belief systems. I would just say, yeah, it's the experience of being on the internet today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Follow-up questions that I will save for the discussion. Thanks.
Beautiful, thank you. Marcin, if I'm pronouncing that right, you have a question about new systems. Are you here? Marcin? All right. Shayla, you had a question. You had your hand up if you want to ask.
Thanks. I was just trying to write it. Um, it that was wonderful, Rina.
Thank you.
Yeah, really appreciate the way you're presenting extremely complex things in a way that I can take in. I wanted to follow up on your remark about moral integrity. And it feels to me like that piece of our value system right now is fragmenting very rapidly and creating massive problems, including, violence. And it feels also connected to everything you touched on, like the fact that the primacy of the individual self is dissolving. It makes it much more difficult to locate where our moral integrity is. And I just wondered if you have anything you want to say about that.
I agree with you. I think our moral integrity is also fragmenting. Um, maybe a couple things I want to say. The first being the way I try to orient my perspective has that front and center because I find that personally for me it's a compass, and holding to my values and what I believe, um, and and primarily that's one of like selflessness and compassion. Um, that to me seems like a pretty good guiding signpost to follow as we're all trying to make sense of the world, as it gets increasingly disoriented. Um, I think just the sense of compassion and treating others the way you would want to be treated is you really can't go wrong in navigating the world that way. Um, that being said, the other thing I will say, which is a little different, is yeah, we do get this fragmentation of the self, as we get this fragmentation of society, and along with this kind of fragmenting sense of moral framework, I think what we will see probably in the next few decades is something like the emergence of a new religion, that kind of ties all these things together, a new spirituality, a new belief system.
Mm. Thank you, Rena. And I can see that Gary's following up on my question with a few more related questions.
Thanks, Shayla. And good call, Gary. He's going to be presenting next week. So I'm going to take in Gary.
Hey, thanks, Rina. Great presentation. Really thought-provoking. Yeah, my question's in the chat. Just about how do it, like you mentioned something about like moral decay, moral collapse. Curious, like how do we even know that that's happening? Like,
Mm.
what are we collapsing from? When was there a time when there was like moral order that you endorsed?
Yeah, that's a good point. Probably never, honestly. Um, I think throughout history, we have this persistent problem of hierarchy and certain people who are better at ascending this hierarchy than others, using that difference in power position to coerce others. Um, and I think that is anthropological. I think that is innate to the primate species. If we look at other primates, a lot of other primates exhibit this same hierarchical status seeking behavior because that determines access to mates and access to resources. And so to me, that is one of the fundamental signatures of humanity. It's this like drive for status and power. And I think until we can identify that, and figure out how to not mitigate it, but to not necessarily, but to direct that impulse towards um, ends that could be more beneficial to our society as a whole, I think we will have a problem with morality. Um, but yeah, I think it comes from recognizing this like innate anthropological drive. Maybe that doesn't really answer your question, but I guess I would say I have never really endorsed any moral system that has previously structured our world.
That makes sense. Thanks, Rina.
Right. Yeah, I'm looking forward to Gary's presentation. There might be a nice, like, deep metaphysical dialectic happening in this series with the presenters. So we'll take about two more questions, and you're good for time, Rina. For the
Yeah.
yeah. Wealth had a really great article that we put on the syllabus. If you can ask your question, my friend.
Sure. Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Rina. This is great. I'm inspired. And the question that I put in the chat first, and I since wrote like two more that I didn't send yet, is something like how do you think about wisdom and alignment? Like if everything, even if we wish otherwise, if everything is a game of power, what are the forces? What's the magic by which we can sort of orient towards the good
Mm,
and see a future that's flourishing?
yeah, I mean, I think number one is identifying that drive, and being self-aware of our behavior as a species. So I think growing self-awareness and growing meta-awareness of our planet, of our species, of our behaviors, of our innate tendencies. I think awareness is the start of it. In terms of like maybe more specifics, like I think compassion, selflessness, generosity. These are all, and maybe I'm saying this because these are values that I feel like are scarce today. And it's reactionary on my part, but I find that for me, those are good guiding principles. I also think that as we begin to see the world as more interconnected and really all part of the same human organism, and all of our actions having ripple effects on everybody else, we will I think those like more communitarian values will naturally start to become more dominant.
Can I ask a follow-up, Peter? Yeah. Um, and besides sort of, I mean, you mentioned like network states and also sort of crypto governance. Do you see any like what are the memes or the communities or the kinds of things that you see do interesting things that that sort of can that are not just good but also winning or like on a trajectory
Mhm.
to be winning?
Mm,
And I know it's a really hard
yeah,
question.
I think if you ask me this in like 5 years, the landscape will be completely different and it will be easier to answer. I think there's a couple interesting projects that they're very new, but I'm hopeful for them. One of them is like Meta Label itself and what Yancey is doing with the Artist Corporation, and creating a new legal structure for artists to have more autonomy and more power, in an economic sense. The other is something called Subvert Co-op. It is like a community-owned band camp, where musicians can sell songs or sell merch, and it's community-owned. So ownership in this cooperative increases the more you contribute, the more active you are. So I'm really hopeful about projects that kind of challenge this traditional notion of ownership, because I think ownership then determines incentives. And then if you have ownership set up in a way that is extractive, it will lead to extractive practices, and people taking advantage of other people. So those might be a couple projects that I would mention. I mean, Subvert just launched like last week, so time will tell on the success of these types of things. Another project I like is called Radical Exchange. It's run by Glenn Weil and Aubrey Tang, who is Taiwan's former technology minister, I want to say. And they are a crypto-based community, and they're experimenting with different ways to do governance that is more decentralized and uh, kind of takes into account this like plurality of different viewpoints, and some interesting technology coming out of that as well.
Thank you.
Thanks, Wolf. We had a really great question from Colin. Colin, if you can ask your question.
Yeah. Hey, Rina. Hey, Peter. Yeah, really inspiring again. I can echo Ren in that. And you've been flirting around the response to my inquiry, which has to do with moral and ethics, but more so just bringing this into our relationship with ourselves, in our lived being. We have a lot of information right now. I'm curious for myself, and I feel like for others to be able to truly grapple with something like donut economics. we come to that with a certain frame. And I'm curious, what ecologies of practice do you feel are important to generate this shift in how we're relating to life, how we are growing in compassion, how we are growing in being able to make sense um, in that space in terms of education, especially. I'm curious how that resonates with your journey.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of practice, I would say, um, like helping others, taking any moment that you can to help someone else, which is, pretty simplistic, but it then makes you feel a sense of like interconnectedness with somebody else, building community, caring for the land that you're on. For example, like my partner and I do some gardening around our house, and yeah, we like take care of the land around us, just because we realize that like it's not something that's so separate from us. I think small actions like that maybe. I I don't know if I'm understanding your question correctly, but I hope that's helpful.
It's a pretty thick concept that I'm struggling to articulate myself.
Mhm.
I mean, it's definitely helpful for you to comprehend like how you are expressing your values. I'm also curious about the next generations. I'm thinking of my 12-year-old brother
Mm,
who doesn't want to do anything else except play video games, and he
mm,
doesn't want to take anybody else's perspective. Now, granted, he's in that developmental stage. I'm
mhm.
curious how we can invite that accommodation to kind of what you said, that chaos, this accommodation into assimilation with growing into that um, capacity to take perspective more so than maybe fit the role that our education system brings to us, to bring more of us together. I feel like we're still
Yeah.
focused on that earlier paradigm of individuality
Yeah.
over community.
I mean, yeah, it's a tough question because I think the infrastructure to like build this kind of world doesn't really exist yet. Um, but yeah, I mean, this is probably not a good answer what you're going for, but like I think cultivating like self-awareness of the self, and like curiosity about one's own mental processes, and motivations and aversions and all of that, I think is good, just awareness practice, that then you can use to cultivate like awareness in other realms. But yeah, I mean, it's hard to point to an answer because there's no like infrastructure for like us all to do that together. That world is not built yet. So it's almost like we're like bootstrapping that on an individual level until enough people kind of share this sense of perspective, and then maybe then things really like take off from there, which I kind of think is starting to happen. But yeah, I mean, for me personally, it's been like a pretty individual journey.
Thank you.
That's cool. It's really cool because I'm working with someone from Head On. He's a philosopher builder, and the whole thing is to try to close what he calls the meta perspectival gap through this program. And yeah, let's do one more question because Quan had a question about myth. Quan, if you're here, if you can ask that to Rina, and then we'll pivot to the
Yeah,
next.
yeah, Rina, that's really fantastic presentations.
Thank
And my question is, when you use the flood of information, and McLuhan used the terms of deluge of information, and medium is the message. So I wonder, do you see the internet and this flood in that space, in the intellectual space or in the psychological or whatever space, this flood of information and energy is a modern form of this flood myth.
Mm,
And
yeah, I like that question. In a way, it is. In a way, it is because after the flood, um, the world was completely different, and the world had to be rebuilt. Um, And in the same way with the printing press and with the internet, these technologies that flood our information ecosystem, I think also catalyze a similar breakdown and then rebuilding process. That's really interesting. It's definitely like the flood myth.
And in that sense, we can actually cultivate the practice of metacognition, right? That's how you rise above the flood
Mm, yeah, become aware
and build a
that the flood is
community of people with that condition. It's more like relating to your beginning thesis of the internet becoming self-aware. It's like developing a self-consciousness in a way.
Mm, yeah.
I'm all jazzed up and I'm all animated. A lot of great threads here. Thanks for the wonderful questions, everyone. Um, before we close out this portion and go on a brief break, Rina, any parting words, any thoughts you'd like to leave us with?
Um, I am just so thankful that you guys are all here. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions or want to chat any further, you can find me on my Substack or send me a message. But yeah, I'm just really grateful to have you all here.
All right. Yeah, send some love to Rina with however you're doing those emojis or in the chat. And I know Rina has to split, so we'll see you next week, hopefully. And we're going to take like a 3-4 minute break so you can go to the washroom, get a bite to eat, and then we're going to pivot to the collective inquiry. So if you want to slip out, now is the time to do so. Otherwise, turn on your camera and I'll talk about how we're going to do the inquiry on the other side. So, Rina, thanks so much for coming today, and we'll be back in a couple minutes.
Thank you. Bye.